Are there any Ron Paul supporters in the room? A few.
I support.
Actively involved in the campaign?
Oh,
Yeah. So I mean, I think Ron Paul supporters deserve a lot of credit for getting libertarian ideas out there and for, in some ways, really dominating the libertarian movement. And I think in some ways, I think the dominance of the libertarian movement that Ron Paul's campaign has had is, while on the one hand it's great for getting libertarian ideas out there, on the other hand it's sort of dangerous because what happens is it sort of derails the whole movement. Everything becomes about promoting Ron Paul, supporting Ron Paul. And sure, Ron Paul's a good vehicle for getting things out there, but at the same time, he's a single point of failure, potentially. I mean, you can simply point to Ron Paul and be like, oh, well, he published all these racist newsletters back 20 years ago. And so, I mean, when you do that sort of thing, when you have just this one figure who, you know, has his own problems, and they can discredit him on however specious grounds, they're attacking the whole libertarian movement because the whole libertarian movement is busy supporting Ron Paul. And I think another problem with supporting Ron Paul is that Ron Paul is a politician, and we're an anti-politics movement, or a lot of us are anti-politics. And so if I'm going to be promoting Ron Paul and promoting what Ron Paul's about, then I stop promoting what I'm about. And the reason that is because what I'm about is having nobody run the country. And so it's much easier for me to directly address what I believe about politics and about the government if I go ahead and promote nobody for president, and nobody for mayor, and nobody for Senate, and nobody for Congress, because that's who I want in all of those positions. And there's this idea often promoted by libertarians who also identify as anarchists that Ron Paul is a gateway drug, that people aren't ready to hear about anarchism, and that anarchism is too radical. What you need to do is you need to promote a politician whose ideas don't necessarily resemble your own, but might be more palatable to the general public. And it's sort of an article of faith among Ron Paul supporters that this is true, and they, you know, assert it again and again without any real numbers, without any real evidence. Is Ron Paul really the best way to go, or is Ron Paul getting the results he's getting just because we're all doing the Ron Paul thing? And I think, you know, the latter is more likely the case, and I think at the same time, the whole Ron Paul thing sort of makes it more difficult for people like me who don't necessarily go with Ron Paul and everything and don't want to identify myself to a non-libertarian as a libertarian, and for them to immediately think Ron Paul, because then I have to distinguish myself from what they already think, their preconceptions about what Ron Paul might think, and then I have to, you know, it's an extra 10 minutes out of my day to talk about what I really believe. So, getting back to the gateway drug thing, I think it's completely false. I think you can talk to people directly about anarchism, and I think the Vote for Nobody campaign is a really great way to do that because it's funny. And it's disarming in that way. I mean, you're not going to scare people away by telling them that nobody will keep their campaign promises, and that nobody will hear your concerns, nobody will vote in your best interest. I mean, people hear this and they laugh, they smile, it resonates with them. It's a great icebreaker, and you can do this with people across the political spectrum, especially in a political climate like we have today, where people really prefer none of the above. I mean, there's no candidate out there that's really like everybody's excited about. The Republicans are all sort of very disappointed with their slate of primary candidates, and Democrats are largely disappointed with the results they've gotten.
Rightly so.
Yeah, rightly so. So, I mean, you can easily talk to people about how nobody is better qualified than you to run your life. And you can do that without scaring people away. And I don't think you need a politician in the middle of that discussion. And one place that I've been talking about the Vote for Nobody campaign a lot lately is Occupy Wall Street, and I've been getting really, really great reception there, and that's, you know, a place where people are going because they're disenchanted with what's going on in politics today, and it does have a very large anarchist contingent, so it's, you know, a place where it's already very amenable. But I go to other events that have nothing to do with Occupy Wall Street, and it works just as well there. But so we were supposed to have a talk about Occupy Wall Street today by my good friend Ethan, who is apparently not here. And so Nick asked me if I would talk about Occupy Wall Street, and I don't want to do that because I don't really like the sound of my own voice. And
we've got another occupier here who might be willing to help out.
Well, yeah, so I figured we have other people here who have been down to the Occupy Wall Street movement, who have been involved in the Occupy Wall Street movement, who've read about it, who've thought about it. So Matt's been involved in Vermont, and I know...
Oakland.
Sorry?
Occupy Oakland.
Occupy Oakland? Awesome.
Oakland.
We'd love to hear more about that, I'm sure. I know Evan came down, and he had a Grow Vegetables Not Government sign that went over really well.
Yes.
And so my experiences in Occupy Wall Street have been overwhelmingly positive. I've met a lot of really cool anarchists working down there, and I've talked to a lot of statists, a lot of reformist liberals who have, over the last several months, grown more and more radical. A lot of them have become anarchists in the process. And I think it's been a really, really great environment and a really great context to talk to people about the power structures that exist, and about the enclosure of public spaces, and about the way that large institutions have become increasingly, have gained increasingly more control over individual lives, and how that has limited our freedom, our opportunity. And Matt, do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think that that's one of the, in my experience, I went down, my first time in Zuccotti was after, oh, sure. Yeah, my own first experience in Zuccotti was on the 19th, so the Monday after everything kicked off, and it was really interesting mix of people. And what I found particularly interesting was, and this is something I've been ruminating a lot on, and has been kind of the nature of its kind of leaderlessness. In that, when it kicked off, like, one of the most interesting things was that no one really had a defining narrative about what does this mean, because there's so many movements in, you know, libertarianism, Marxism, all of these different ideologies that have been around for a while, have these very, very well wrought kind of schemas around them, these stereotypes about what that means, and so people can encounter the ideas or counter the identity and never actually encounter the ideas, because they hit the identity and then they are like, okay, I know what that's about, that people who believe this are X, Y, and Z, I am not X, Y, and Z, and therefore I don't engage with the argument. Then, like, with Occupy, and I think the Tea Party was actually another example of this early on, sort of emerged, there was no background, there's no real sort of initially kind of narrative that people could use to simply bypass it. And so there are all of these conversations of people in the milieu who were just talking to each other, who normally would never do so, would never actually hear each other. I'm sure you experience this too, but would never hear each other's arguments. It would have been, oh, that person is a socialist. Therefore, they won't listen to me, and I won't listen to them. I'll stand over here with the Gadsden flag. They'll stand over there with their red flag, and that'll be that. But there are all these incredible opportunities for cross-pollination. And in Occupy Burlington, those things were very similar. Particularly, we had safety shifts, and every 2 hours overnight there would be a different group of people, and every night there would be a group. So, like, there were nights that I walked with socialists, secessionists, anarchists, liberals who had never been involved in politics before. This was their first thing, and it was just really this kind of like people were willing to hear ideas. And I think in some ways, like, stereotypes are starting to develop, those defensive things are starting to ossify around Occupy, but I think it's also the sort of thing where where even if it's going to leave behind this network that bridges a lot of gaps that otherwise wouldn't have been bridged, and so it's the sort of thing where you can throw an idea or you can throw an action into the mechanism or into the network, and if it sticks, it can spread very quickly and very effectively. So that's that kind of like ability to spread action, spread ideas very quickly through the networks is something that I think is hugely valuable, and that sort of there's been within the libertarian community where I'm from, like there's been sort of mixed feelings about engaging with it, but the sort of thing where if it's like, hey, all right, here's an action against drug legalization. Oh wow, we can suddenly, instead of having 5 or 6 people with signs, we have 40 people with signs. This is, an expression of the power of that system. So those are my thoughts. I don't know if you want to throw down about your experience at Oakland.
Okay.
Occupy the podium.
There's no podium.
No,
Nobody took it.
Nobody.
Nobody provided a podium.
So I too am on the campaign for nobody at Occupy Oakland and Occupy SF. And the interesting thing about those two is they're kind of like sister occupations. They do a lot to sort of collaborate together. For example, there was a tweeting network that occurred almost immediately where, like, if the rumor became confirmed that the police were going to take action against Oakland or San Francisco, immediately they would take the BART, which is the public transportation, the tunnel under the bay, across the bay to the other Occupy, so that you double the numbers wherever the police were. And that kind of coordination happened so fast that police couldn't respond, and they were overwhelmed in a lot of cases whenever there was a police action, and so they shut down the BART. And that became the strategy, was they shut down public transportation.
Wow.
Which is just to show conveniences so many people who are not involved that it becomes very obvious very quickly what's going on, which is sort of good. But one of the first things that I did at both Occupies was I polled people as to why they were there. And I polled 200 people in San Francisco and 200 people in Oakland, and I asked, what's your first cause? What's your first reason for being here? And I got dramatically different answers. And so I didn't even want to approach the idea of a list of demands or a list of purposes or whatever, because it was so decentralized. So I generated word clouds of everybody's responses. And the number one response in San Francisco was end the Fed, and the number one response in Oakland was abolish capitalism. But the number two response in both towns, in both cities, was abolish corporate personhood.
Nice.
And so, like, it just became obvious that if you were willing to step it back one step, that you could create this very broad agreement across the board. Whereas, like, the communists, and I'm just going to be very generic, but we'll say the communists in Oakland didn't really care about the Federal Reserve at all. And the anti-Fed crowd in San Francisco was obviously not anti-capitalist. But everybody agreed that corporations were a problem and that there were legal mechanisms that made them a problem. So I saw an opportunity for cooperation, although I was not able to realize that in any way. I've kind of distanced myself from both of them because I kind of feel like they've been hijacked and there are secret leaders. But the culture is still very nobody supporting. So, that's my experience.
Great.
Maybe you want to wrap with what do you think people should do from here as far as either vote for nobody or Occupy?
Okay, sure. So I think that you guys should all go out and campaign for nobody. This is a very important election year, and I think we should take advantage of it. I think that we can go out and talk to people about life without leaders, and we can do it without couching our positions behind a politician. It's a lot of fun to talk to people, and especially in this context, because it's just, they will laugh and you will laugh with them, and it's just, you're going out and cracking jokes with people and talking about politics. It's a really great way to mock the system, and I would strongly encourage you guys to all go out, get together with your friends, make signs, print flyers, I guess it's a little late here in New Hampshire because the primary season is, you know, moved on elsewhere, but you guys still have opportunities to go out and to talk to people, and I think Yankees are all about not having people tell them what to do. So this is always a great place to do it. And I guess I'll leave it at that.
Awesome.
Does nobody have a website?
Nobody has several websites, actually. So on Facebook, it's what? Facebook/Vote for Nobody?
Vote for Nobody. Facebook/Vote for Nobody with a 4.
With a 4, not spelled out. Yeah, Google Vote. Yeah. Huh?
Oh, I just had sort of a question of sort of is there like, yeah, there's a website, is there kind of like coordinating group for like, or coordinating network of people in multiple places kind of on this campaign?
There's one in the works. There's a guy named Chris Bruner, who's he went and he purchased a lot of the inactive Vote for Nobody URLs, and he's trying to sort of have them all direct to a single site. And his plan is, I'm doing some of the art for it. His plan is to launch it after the primary is over, so it'll be a general election site. I don't know what the URL will end up being though.
I know there's
Google it.
there's anti.politics.ws or something like that.
I think that's right.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's something like that. You just, I mean, like what Rocco
If
said,
you
Google
plug
search.
Vote for Nobody into Google search, that's usually the first one that comes
Yeah.
up for me.
I think Brad did that one. Brad Spangler. Did he do
That's
that
right.
one? Yeah.
So yeah, and you can get some really nice flyers there that seem to be really popular. People come to my lit table requesting them if I don't have them out. So yeah, go out, signs, flyers, have fun, crack jokes with people, and talk about anarchy.
Excellent.